Okay, thank you for tuning in, everyone, to another episode over here at our Level Effect podcast series, where we're bringing in a lot of industry experts and professionals and course authors that are developing some exciting things on our platform. And today we have Summer Rankin over here, and I'm going to hand it off over to her to talk a little bit about the new course she's bringing to our platform, Python programming for data science and cybersecurity, which might be getting a little bit of a rename to include some more concepts around data science, which we'll talk about. But let me hand it off over to you, Summer, and give yourself a little introduction to our listeners.
Sure. Thanks so much. Yeah, my name is Summer Rankin. I am a course designer and an instructor for GTK Cyber. I have a PhD in complex systems and brain sciences. I did a postdoc after that at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where I studied music cognition and auditory perception. And now I'm a senior data scientist at Booz Allen Hamilton, in addition to the work I'm doing for GTK Cyber.
Very cool. That's a pretty well decorated background that you got there. So not just understanding the digital data, but the data going through the brain, like the brain circuits. So I guess an interest from both ends, really.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Very cool. Very cool. Thank you again for being here with us today. So, um, I think before we talk about the course and whatnot, maybe it might be good to actually start exploring about concepts about data science in general, because it's a pretty hot topic right now. I mean, it always was data, the new oil. Like we knew about this for years, but AI, right? Like that's the big thing these days. So maybe let's talk a little bit. What, in your words, is data science? Like, how would you explain this industry, what it's about, and maybe tell our listeners about that?
Yeah. So the way I think about the industry is that, data science is the act of taking data, getting insights from it by applying algorithmic experiments, right? That's kind of where like the science part comes from. And really, like any industry can benefit from this. Like we've seen huge gains in things like healthcare or knowledge management, obviously cybersecurity. And basically, like my feeling is like if you have the money and the ability to manage your data and analyze it, then it's probably going to teach you things that you didn't know or confirm that some ideas you've had. But that's kind of the landscape and kind of how I think about it is like, you're just using data to make decisions or learn about, whatever it is the data is collected on.
That's interesting. Yeah. So algorithmic experiments. I haven't actually heard that term myself before. Like, how would you actually explain that? Or
I
is that
think I
just,
made it up.
yeah, just on the spot kind of thing? Yeah, pretty cool. Um, yeah, like we're seeing a huge focus on this. A lot of people are getting quite interested inside this field. You're mentioning about industry benefits and insights we can gain, and that it's applicable to any industry. It's not just cybersecurity. So, like, how would you explain how it might be related to just cybersecurity then? Like, how are they related? Is a good way to maybe start.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because there's this like interesting divide between kind of like data science everywhere else and then like the way that like data science and AI kind of participates in the cybersecurity world. And
Hmm.
they aren't all that different, but for some
Hmm.
reason there's like a big separation there that I
Yeah.
find like people, which is kind of interesting. I don't know why, but it's
Yeah.
I have a feeling it's because I think AI and anomaly detection, essentially, right? That's kind of the bread and butter of cybersecurity in terms of data, is like something that probably came up within cybersecurity kind of on its own, right? Like it's always had a lot of like cryptography and mathematicians and like all these kinds of folks developing things on their own, which kind of happened in parallel, if you will, to kind of all of this other machine learning that's like going on in terms of like detecting fraud for banks or, categorizing things or classifying things for healthcare. I think that's why they kind of remain separate for some reason, even though they're
Hmm.
they're all kind of doing similar things. So to actually answer your question, anomaly detection is I think the biggest thing, which is where you can either look at things in time, right? So like a time series, and you're looking at strange behavior, people logging in, a bunch of people at one time, or a bot, or you're looking at somebody, doing something that's outside of their pattern, maybe. So you can look at things from like a single user perspective or a larger perspective in time. You can also look at things in what I'm going to call space. So, you can kind of think about, and we do this in our data science course, which is where you're looking at like, let's say you have some data and you want to look at the groups in the data. You don't even know how many groups there are, but let's just see. Okay, these kinds of things cluster together, and then maybe there's some outliers, right? So you
Hmm.
can kind of think of that as like triaging what may or may not be anomalous so that you can give it to, an analyst to take a look at. And then you have like the classic stuff of like, let's say you're training a spam detection and you have a bunch of examples of spam, a bunch of examples
Hmm.
of not spam. You can train it to, detect that or not. That's less anomaly. You have to have a lot more examples of that. And then of course, like generative AI is lending itself to a lot of other new things. But I think those core competencies are still kind of there in terms of cybersecurity and how people analyze the data.
Yeah, a lot of what we're doing in cybersecurity, I think a lot of our listeners typically know us at Level Effect more about cybersecurity specific training, and everything at the end of the day really is about monitoring for deviations from the norm. Like, what is the baseline? Looking for anomaly, just I guess some type of anomalous activity, some kind of deviation from what we expect to be normal, and everything that you're saying it's funny because if we weren't talking about data science, it actually sounds like you're talking a lot about cybersecurity right there. They're
Exactly.
really overlapped quite well. Um, so having the ability to train models, detection rules, like there's even mentioning of detection engineering. Like from what you're saying, again, if we weren't talking about data science, it sounds like we're talking about cybersecurity. So
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting perspective there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that being said, um, because when you first get started in cybersecurity and it's sort of like a mid-level IT role, a lot of people get started inside of a SOC. They're working as an analyst or kind of firefighting. You know, if you were to start in a SOC, sort of knowing some concepts about data science beforehand, do you think that that could maybe help, I guess, the analyst maybe understand why they're doing what they're doing, or maybe think about future preventative ways to prevent what they're seeing and kind of reduce that like a risk profile? Is that fair to say?
I think so. I think that like understanding data science and kind of like how your data could be used differently is
Hmm.
helpful, especially if you have enough skill to actually go and do that, right? If you
Hmm.
have the ability, because you've got the data, like right, if you're sitting there,
Yeah.
it's just a matter of like, can I install Python or R, whatever it is, and
Hmm.
actually go and analyze this to help create some of those rules or create some of those things. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, I'm going to replace myself with a model, right? It's more about like,
Hmm.
how can this model help me do my job better?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it's definitely going to be useful because the other thing you can do too is think if you get to a point where you have enough data or you have enough, I don't know, I guess money or resources to
Hmm.
bring in somebody who maybe could do that analysis for you, then you're still the domain SME, and like you need to tell them what they're looking for and what they're doing, and maybe they're just a data scientist, they're not a cyber person, and so it's
Yeah.
important that, you have the ability to kind of talk with them about that and provide them with like what they're going to need to know. And you have this partnership basically.
Yeah, so I like that because we're talking about threat actors. We're sort of monitoring the data that they leave behind or interact with in our network that reflects into logs and events and so forth, right? So
Mhm.
data science over here actually sounds pretty cool as a good accompanying type of skill and development you can have. So if we're monitoring threat actor data and we know how to perform these algorithmic experiments, I really like that term that you threw out there earlier. If we know how to work with that, right? If we know how to analyze that data and extrapolate things, they do kind of go hand in hand. So I like this that you're kind of talking about it because I think that's really good for the listeners to hear, right? They kind of benefit each other, really. So
Yeah.
cool. Um, so I think it also might be worth it to dive a little bit more into your background over there because you did talk about a lot. So kind of peeling back on that a little bit. I mean, what got you started on this path? Like, why did you want to pursue data science? And you've obviously been doing it for a long time. Like I said, quite decorated. So you've stuck with it. Maybe expand more on that. That'd be really interesting to know.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. Yeah, so I started out as a musician. I was like doing music, and I've always been interested in, like how music affects behavior. But I went into college thinking that like I was going to be a performer.
Mm,
Realized really quickly that like this is a hard way to make a living, and
mm,
got really interested in like the fact that they actually studied music and behavior in psychology. So I ended up, interacting with a professor who eventually became my PhD advisor, who said, "Oh, you should come volunteer in my lab. We study, neuroscience, and we use fMRI and all this other stuff." And so I was like, "Oh, well, I'm not a programmer, and like I don't have a lot of math, so I don't know if I can do this." And he was like, "Yeah, just take as much math as you can. You can do this." And so I started volunteering in the lab, and that was like my introduction to programming, where they everyone
mm,
was using MATLAB to it's still a really super nice language and common in like engineering and academia. And
mm.
they were like, okay, here's MATLAB, and here's a bunch of scripts that people have written to collect data and create experiments and analyze MIDI data and things like that. And so I was like so blown away with how difficult it was. Like this was like 2002. So there was no YouTube, there was no Coursera, no Stack Overflow. And
Yeah.
I trust me, I looked. I was always online like trying so hard using this brand new tool called Google. um, and so I would read a lot of the documentation. That was really all I had available, which was also, I mean, it might as well have been a different language. It was tough. And I did a lot of trial and error. The biggest thing I did was like reverse engineering other people's code. And then of course, like my peers, helped me out as much as they could, but you can't like constantly ask people for help, right?
Mm.
So cut to, a year later, and he's like, "Oh, you should apply to come to this program and get your PhD." And I just remember thinking like I don't have the skills that these guys have. Like everybody in this program was like physicists and mathematicians and like these guys that had like, degrees in neuroscience. And I was like, I have a degree in music and like psychology. Like, what am I going to do? So, I ended up getting in, and let's just say the learning curve was so steep for me. It wasn't even funny, but it was great. I made a lot of friends, and my professors were all there to help me. And so anyhow, throughout all of this kind of like journey to become a neuroscientist, I
Mhm,
had a lot of good experiences with learning, a lot of great teachers, and a lot of sort of absent teachers, like with the coding. And
mhm,
so it really inspired me at the time and even now to like provide an experience for people that's either much better than mine or as good
mhm,
as mine. And like I'm really, I don't know, that's just like something I really enjoy doing, is like being there for somebody to show them the 10th way that you can
mhm.
calculate something because the first nine didn't make sense. So I was always like a TA, and then after that I was an adjunct professor, and I even taught at like an early college for a few years, Bard Early College in Baltimore. And I've always taught a huge range of things, right? Everything from auditory science to computer science to biology, and even some music courses along the way.
Mhm,
And I so at some point, especially when I was teaching computer science to the early college students, I had such a blast, and I was like, oh, you know what? I really love this, and I miss it. And so I was thinking like, oh, what, should I go back to academia, or should I go into some industry or something else? And so I was looking around, and it seemed like there was this new field called data science. And I was like, is this already what I do? Like I'm a scientist. And it appeared that way. It appeared like they used a couple of different models that I hadn't seen before. I was a little bit more like sort of general statistics heavy at the time, and using like general linear models and things like that
Yeah.
to analyze like um, functional MRI data. So like we would take scans of the brain.
Mhm,
And so I was like, well, I think I could do data science, but I don't know Python because I'd only used MATLAB for like 13 years. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do? Maybe I could like do a boot camp and like really learn Python. And so that's that's what I ended up doing is I went to a data science boot camp by a company called Metis.
Hmm.
And they were phenomenal. Like they whipped me into shape in 3 months, taught me all kinds of Python, and I did nothing. Like 24/7 was like working on my portfolio and my projects. And I got good enough. I didn't become an expert in 3 months, of course, but
Hmm.
I got good enough. I built up a bunch of different things. I understood how to use all the different models and how to communicate. That was a big one because I'm used to like in the academic space, like you can be as complicated as you want and no one cares. And in the
Hmm.
business world, that's a very different, very different
Yeah.
thing. And so then I just started applying and heavily used my new portfolio on GitHub and eventually got a job at Booz Allen Hamilton, which is where I am now,
Hmm.
doing work for all kinds of different federal clients and commercial clients and different things like that. So that's kind of the journey. I wouldn't. I always say like what I did before I was quote unquote a data scientist wasn't actually all that different, but
Hmm.
we just have a different term for it now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's a really good journey. I think there's a lot of, I guess, practical demonstration on your part and demonstrated engagement as well too. Like as you went through all of that, there's a lot of relations as well too. You know, what starting in music, interests, I guess, in the brain, how things work, and mathematics and data science. A lot of these things are tied together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Models, frameworks, trends, all these types of stats and analysis that you can perform, right?
Right.
There's a lot of relationships there in your background, and I think it's really good for the listeners here to understand like where you started and how you got to where you were, because I think hearing how much you put yourself forward into it, I think it speaks a lot about just how interested and how engaged you are with your domain. And I think if the listeners are trying to get started with data science, um, getting out there, experimenting, practicing, applying things sounds, at least from what you've said, to be something that was sort of a core theme in your journey. Like not just kind of taking the knowledge in, but doing something with it. So,
Yeah, that and
yeah.
being able to demonstrate it in a way that you can kind of show people is
Hmm.
is also really help. It's not required, but like it's really helpful. So
Yeah.
like doing those open software releases that we did back in the MATLAB days, and then putting some projects up on GitHub has been it's been really useful to kind of demonstrate for people in a way that they understand, right? Like,
Hmm.
oh, this is what I can do, and here's some examples of that.
Yeah, right. Like useful, solving problems. And, I think I was going to actually ask you at some point over here, how did you transition to start developing training content? But I think you sort of alluded to that quite a bit, right? Like from your
Mhm.
experience there, you already at some point were in your journey teaching other people, getting involved. You mentioned being an instructor, adjunct instructor, training. So I think it's a bit of a no-brainer how you've ended up over here, right? So I think that's what I wanted to talk about is why the teaching component. But I think you kind of answered a little bit about that. But if there's anything that you want to add, like, is there a certain fulfillment that you get out of being an instructor?
You know what? I just really like it. And it's also, I guess I'm good at it. So I tend to enjoy things that I'm good at, although not
Yeah.
always. I'm bad at lots of hobbies, for example, but I still like some of those. But like when it comes to teaching, part of what it is like I'm good at it, so I enjoy it. But there is just like a certain joy in like seeing people grow, help, like I said, helping people who have been banging their head against the wall, being
Hmm.
able to say like these 9 times didn't work. I still don't get it. Let's try this 10th way. And like, then they get it. That like light bulb is
Yeah.
amazing to kind of see and to help people in that journey. It's also like I was saying, I really I always say that part of what makes me good at teaching is that I like teaching the things that I wasn't good at. So
Mm.
a lot
That's
of the
interesting.
skills that I use in my job did not come easy to me.
Hmm.
For example, like programming, like I was saying, like the programming and the math was really like that was a hard row for me. And It didn't come easy to me. It was a hard fought battle to get that skill and get that knowledge. But I
Hmm.
think that's also what makes me good at teaching it, because I am never very far away from like what it's like to not understand.
Yeah.
And I think that some of the worst teachers I've had, it's not because they weren't smart, right? It's
Hmm.
because they don't know what it's like to not be smart. They don't
Yeah.
remember, or maybe it wasn't ever really that hard for them. So they just kind of
Hmm.
look at you and go, well, this is really straightforward. Why don't you understand this? Like, I don't know what to
Hmm.
tell you. And so
Hmm.
I always want to give people the experience that, that experience of like, yeah, I remember what this was like, and I'm here with you, and we're going to get you through it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you kind of thrive off of that, right? Seeing people overcome their challenges, and you're sort of trying to make it easier for some of the pain, some of the lessons
Yeah.
that you went through, that you suffered.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
really
not
good.
in
I
the
like
camp.
that.
There's always like two people, right? There's people who are, like, I guess I've been guilty of this for some things, but where you're like, oh, it was hard for me, so it needs to be hard for everybody else. And
Yeah,
like,
gatekeeping. Yeah.
I just don't
Yeah.
feel that way. I think that some things you only learn from banging your head against the wall. That's true to some extent, but
Hmm.
like, it doesn't have to be that way.
Right. Yeah. Just because I did it doesn't mean you have to do it too, right? So
Yeah.
that's good. No, I like that a lot. I think that gives the listeners a good background about you and your interests, your motives. So, let's talk a little bit about the course now. More specifically, um, I'm going to go on a limb here and say, I guess you made this course to make it
I
easier
did.
for the things that you had some trouble with, because I think that's sort of sounds like the theme, or am I off a little bit over here?
No, that's true. So there's like two people I think about when I made this course. And one is, so it came out of, we were teaching this applied data science course, and
Hmm.
still do, right? And I still have people that come in that are like, I don't really know Python. And I always feel so bad for them because they're always like really lost. And I don't think they get as much out of it. And I don't think I would either if I were them. So it's certainly not to blame them, but we kind of said, we need like a bridge for people because, I want them to get something out and be able to do all of the exercises. But if they haven't used Python, what do we do? So it kind of came out of that like experience of seeing that in our particular in these like basically like cybersecurity kind of analysts we were running into. And then also it's the idea is that it's for somebody like me who maybe is coming from a different programming language but has never used Python before, to kind of
Hmm.
just ramp you up and get you ready to do data science. But it's also for someone who's like, even if you've never programmed at all, I tried to write it for that audience as well. So,
Hmm.
I'm trying to take you from like, soup to nuts here with Python slash really any kind of programming language, so that you can feel more comfortable and go ahead and start, analyzing that data in the next course that you take, or, even in your own current job.
Nice. Yeah. So like a twofold approach, very accessible. You take it, you can kind of apply it to other things. Awesome. Yeah. And I think it sounds like this is a targeted approach. So this is a Python programming for data science cybersecurity course by name, which I think
Mm-hmm.
we're up for debate. I think we might be maybe making that a little bit more targeted, possibly, um,
Possible.
as like a Python for data science type of course. Because,
Uh-huh.
we talked about that earlier on, right? Is that there's a lot of overlap. So like calling this course Python programming for data science and cybersecurity, I don't know. It's almost redundant on that last part, right? Because there's such an overlap, but some clarification is also good for learners when they're searching for a
Well,
course, right?
yeah, so the cybersecurity part comes from the content or the actual data that we're using.
Mm,
Because honestly, like the way that I teach Python to a cybersecurity analyst probably wouldn't be super duper honestly different from the way I would maybe teach it to like an academic. But
hmm.
the examples that we use and kind of the use cases that all of it is couched in, I try to keep it focused on cybersecurity cases as much as possible, and having you
Hmm.
do tasks that would lend themselves more to that, like manipulating strings and things of that nature. So it is targeted for data science audience. I'm sorry, for a cyber audience, but
Hmm.
for the most part, it really is kind of like, I think of it as like the data science 101 course, which is like, what is
Yeah.
Python and how am I going to do some math with Python? That's kind of
Yeah.
kind of where I come from.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. So I think it's applicable to both sides then, working with cybersecurity data. That's a really good way to delineate sort of like the use cases and gains that students can have going through it. So I guess walk us through it. Like, what does it look like to start this course? You mentioned it's quite entry level, like new, accessible, but walk us through kind of maybe starting the course, getting midway, and then what does it look like when you finish? Because that would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, so when you start the course, we're going to take you from like what is Python and like how do I install it and how do I use it and what are all of these packages and libraries that we use. So I go through like what, the kind of the fundamentals, but I do want to point out that one of the reasons that I wanted to develop this course and I wasn't like, oh, this course already exists, right? Because there
Mhm.
are a lot of like intro to Python courses that do exist that are great. But this one, I feel like is filtered out. So there are a lot of things that you can do with Python, and even you as a cybersecurity analyst could do that I am
Mhm.
not going to cover because this is laser focused on the pieces of Python that I think you'll need to get you started with data science. And so that's why, the course is as short as it is, and, why we're able to kind of offer this or why I think we should offer it, right? Because
Mhm.
it doesn't exist. I don't really see it out there necessarily. And I think that it would be, it's a helpful kind of focused course in that way.
Mhm.
So we're going to have, here's what Python is, here's how you install it, and, here's why we use it for data science. We're going to use something called Jupyter Notebooks, which it's like an IDE. It's like a type of IDE to edit the Python and basically print the output kind of all in one place.
Mhm.
It's a very common place, even nowadays. Even if I'm going into production, I usually start in a Jupyter notebook with all my experiments. And so that's what we're using for the class is like the real world stuff that, I use at my job all the time. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the fundamentals. So we're going to do, like operators, variables, strings, how to manipulate strings. And that is all going to help you basically kind of manipulate and clean your data, which is
Mhm.
really what step one of data science is all about is like, all right, let's get the data into a place where we can actually go and model it or do something with it, right? We can't just have a log, which is a big string of a bunch of text, right?
Mhm.
We've got to parse that. We have to grok it first. And so that's kind of part one, which is like all of these things that are going to help you to manipulate the data. And then the next part of it, we're going to go over some basic statistics because really that's kind of the bedrock of all data science. It's what we used to call data science, if you will, is going over some stats and then taking that data that we just cleaned and performing the stats and then visualizing that as well. Because a big part
Mhm.
of like understanding your data and dealing with it is like cleaning it, doing some basic statistics, and then being able to visualize it is such an important part. And especially when you go to tell your data story to whoever your stakeholders are, you're going to need to show pictures. It's just going to help. And then kind of the last part of it is going to be a introduction to pandas. And pandas is a specific module within Python that a lot of us use to basically make vectorized operations easier. Don't worry about what that means. Just know that it is going to accelerate your ability to clean and analyze your data.
Mhm.
So throughout all of this, you're going to have lectures, you're going to have slides, and then interspersed are going to be a bunch of lab exercises. So I'm giving you a bunch of information in Jupyter notebooks, and then I'm also giving you like exercises that you need to complete. I also have answers there for you, and then part of the lectures that you can look at are me going over the answers in the lab and kind of how we got those. And
Mhm.
so you're going
Mhm.
to have those as like not just your knowledge check, but like your hands on kind of throughout the course. After every kind of sub module, you're going to have like do a little bit more, do a little bit more. And then at the very end of the course, we're going to have an exam. So once you finish everything, you will have I believe we have multiple choice and fill in the blank kind of type exam. It's not actually a Jupyter Notebook exam on this one,
Hmm.
just simply because it's kind of this introductory course.
Yeah.
So you have to have, I believe it's 80% on the exam, and then you'll get a certificate that you have, completed the course, and you'll be totally ready to go for the next level of data science from GTK Cyber.
That's the applied data science course. Sort of like, yeah, that next level iteration from
Mhm.
there. Very cool. Yeah, you make it sound like it's introductory, and it sounds like it is, but then it actually gets pretty deep. Like that was a good description of what you're doing and what you're working with. I think for someone who's brand new, right? If they've never touched Python before, if they're not introduced to data science concepts, that's a pretty good in-depth coverage. Like you said, it is laser focused. Exactly like what you need. Like we're not automating emails, we're not automating scripts like you see in a lot of Python courses that,
Right.
right? Like
Which
they're
you
going
could
to teach you
do,
everything. Yeah,
which,
you could.
which is
Yeah.
great, which is
Hmm.
fine, right? And useful and probably great for you as a cybersecurity analyst. However, we won't be
Yeah.
doing any of that because I never use it in data science. So
Yeah, which is perfect, So like that's exactly it. What are you going to learn this course that you would be using day to day? Because I think you saying that right there is a pretty important observation and clarity statement for people to hear.
yeah.
Yeah, cool. So, if someone were to take this course, and go through all the modules, complete it all, what would you say? Like, how would you describe like an outcome? Like, what is an outcome statement for a student completing this course? Are they ready to start applying for jobs, or are they still like at a position where they should be studying some more? Are they ready for something else? How would you describe that?
You mean applying for like data science jobs?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Is it still too introductory at that point?
Probably I wouldn't necessarily apply for a data science job after this.
Hmm.
Although maybe if you had an introductory program, like I know that a lot of companies will have like training programs. So they'll be like, hey, can you do you want to do this training program? It's almost like an internal boot camp sometimes, and then they'll like give you a job after that. You'd probably be ready for one of those or an internship. Um, but in terms of data science, they're probably like when you do that interview, which we can talk about, they're going to be asking you about models. And we're not, this course is not going to really go over really any machine learning models proper,
Hmm.
or even like feature engineering or any of that kind of stuff. So I would say I don't think that you're going to be like ready to go apply. Although I do always encourage people to like apply for jobs, see what it's like, have some bad interviews at at some companies that you don't necessarily want to work for, just to kind of see what you need to
Yeah.
go and learn. Although that's very scary to do.
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
so like an outcome would be, you'll have the ability to import data, well, install Python, right? And so like, especially for cybersecurity, like I've worked incident response for a bunch of different clients. And like when you go in there, they're usually like, okay, what do you need on this stack? Because we're going to install everything and then we're going to air gap it, right? So
Mm.
you'll be able to be like, okay, I'm going to need Python. I'm going to need these 10 libraries. Um, and then take it offline, and then you'll be able to go in there and actually import the data, clean up the data, and analyze it and visualize it. And we actually call this exploratory data analysis, or EDA.
Hmm.
So you will be able to do EDA on really any, pretty much any data set that you'll be able to have your hands on, right? So like a JSON or a CSV, um, or even like an Excel file, like you'll be able to kind of import these things using Python and visualize them to help understand what's going on. So
Hmm.
that's kind of like that's what I think of as like the next step, which you could do to build up your portfolio,
Hmm.
or you could use that like I was saying in your day to day, or
Hmm.
it will be kind of the foundation for like, oh, okay, now I'm ready to build a model because I've got the data in a place where it needs to be.
Hmm. Nice. Yeah. Good coverage. Um, I think quite applicable to a lot of other courses, really. Like if you take this, kind of sounds like you're set up to work with various forms of data, like just consumption, ingesting, kind of manipulating it and applying it to things, which is sort of that's where things lead to eventually, right? After all these
Mhm.
firefighting roles, a lot of positions,
Right.
there's like that perimeter security, perimeter analysis, like perimeter anything, right? But then you get to that data level of okay, like now we need to figure out what the trends are, and it sounds like this kind of starts you up in the right direction. So
Yeah.
I would, yeah, I'd go so far as saying kind of applicable to a lot more than even just the cybersecurity for sure, even though like the data sets are there for it. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I've done incident response where I didn't even use any ML models. I actually just looked at like, I did time series analysis of
Hmm.
behavior, right? And I basically came to them and said, okay, this stuff is weird. We should probably look at it.
Mhm.
You'll be able to do that because
Very cool.
these tools are all you're going to need to get that far.
Mhm.
And you can get fancier with it. We're not going to actually do any of those like ARIMA models or whatever. But like I said, even just like looking at what's anomalous, or being able to get like a handle on the distribution of your data is something you'll be able to do after taking this.
That's awesome. Very, very cool. So, what would you recommend if someone wanted to take this course?
Mhm.
What would you advise, like to get started with things? Any type of prerequisite? Any advice on that matter?
You know, a prerequisite, I'd like to say nothing because I'm hopefully going to take you through all the steps. However, if you'd like to
Yeah.
get a jump start, then you would want to maybe take a look at like creating a GitHub account if you've never done that, and learn how to use GitHub just kind of by yourself. You don't need to like learn how to make a pull request and all that, but learn how to like make a repository, pull that, and do it from the command line. So I do a lot of. I know that they make a lot of tools nowadays, a lot of
Mhm.
GUIs. And even like the Python package manager we're going to install, which is called Anaconda. What I'm going to have you use is actually called Miniconda, which is all at the terminal window, like at the command line, because
Mhm.
I prefer that. It's less buggy and I have more control. And so if you have the ability or the bandwidth rather to learn some basic command line, bash commands, it's really helpful, right? Just changing
Mhm.
directory, changing permissions, listing the files, moving things, copying things, deleting things, all that really simple stuff is so helpful and useful and quick when you can do it all from the terminal window or PowerShell or whatever it is that you're using.
Mhm.
And then you kind of put that together with GitHub and or Python, and it's really nice. It's really clean and easy, and you can make nice scripts that kind of do everything for you. So I
Mhm.
would say that like that's one of the things that I don't really go over in the class, which is like just like bash commands and installing and using GitHub. I mean, I'm going to show you how to pull a repo, but the more you can learn about GitHub, the better, because it's really a wealth of projects in terms of data science. If this is something you're really interested in,
Mhm.
then you're going to want to be on there. You're going to want to know how to fork a repo or clone a repo, or at least create your own so that you can have your own projects on there, because it's a great like public platform for that. And nowadays, they actually
Mhm.
have GitHub Copilot, which is a large language, which is AI, that's going to
Mhm.
help you write your Python code. And so that's super useful because you can actually use that if you want to code in the browser. That's actually something I don't use at work very much, so I don't know much about it, but I want to use it.
Awesome. Very good. Very good. I think the listeners will definitely find that quite helpful. So thank you for going to that level of depth. So, you mentioned AI over there, and I kind of brought it up earlier in the call as well too, because I do want to talk a little bit about that. It is a hot topic.
We
I think
should,
you've
yeah.
covered a lot about the course. Um, what's your general take now, on the data science, machine learning, AI side of things at this point?
I mean, everything is AI. And if everything is AI, nothing is AI. But so the hype machine is like turned up to 11 when it comes to AI.
It is.
However, I think there's like good and bad to that, right? I think that the good news is that like everybody's paying attention. Everybody's thinking about it. And everybody's
Hmm.
like, oh, we gotta like manage our data. And we gotta like hire somebody to do that. And we gotta think about like how AI is gonna help us. All very good things. The thing that's not good is when we say, oh, look at this hammer. This hammer is gonna fix everything in this whole house, right? And
Hmm.
at the moment, the maximum hype is GPT, right? It's these generative AI models, which
Yeah.
are, do not get me wrong, they are freaking cool. Like they are
Hmm.
so cool. What they can do is so much fun, and they're great for a limited scope of use cases, right? And
Hmm.
they're
Hmm.
they're so good for that. But they are not, it's, first of all, it's not general artificial intelligence, right?
Hmm.
And it is not going to solve all of your problems. It is still a fairly narrow scope. It has some problems that are going to continue. It's going to continue to have
Hmm.
because of the way that the algorithm is kind of structured, or that
Hmm.
the transformer architecture is structured, and we really don't. I think it's going to take a bigger shift to kind of overcome some of the limitations. So,
Yeah.
I think, will we get to Gen AI? I mean, AGI maybe, but I think that right now it's not going to solve all your problems. So that's kind of where like the hype machine is getting a little intense for me.
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, guys, not everybody needs Gen AI. Like it's cool. I'm happy to use it where it makes sense,
Hmm.
but sometimes you really just need a logistic regression.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think you're saying things. There's some terms and definitions there that I'm even not too familiar with over there. So I think it's interesting for you to say it to that degree. Um, and it's a good way to kind of break it down, right? Like if everything is AI, then nothing's AI. I like the way that you said that over there because I think it
And
hits
it's a
the point
terrible.
home.
I mean, like, don't tell people I said that. I mean, here's my like professional response.
Okay.
Okay,
All
so
right.
AI is the overarching term, and then within AI, so AI can be a lot of things. Is what we say. AI can be RPA, so robotic process automation, where you're like
Hmm.
automating the mouse clicks on a PowerPoint or whatever. It can be reinforcement learning, like think
Hmm.
video games and things like that. It can be machine learning, right? So machine learning is kind of the subcategory of AI. At least this is kind of the current way we all use it. And
Hmm.
then like within machine learning, you have different types of models like deep learning, which is neural nets. And
Hmm.
then you have within that large language models, which is a specific type of a neural network architecture. So I kind of think of it as like a big circle that gets, smaller and smaller little circles inside of it. And AI is just the current one to kind of mean all things analysis and sort of all
Hmm.
things data science. And so where now everyone is kind of using AI, and it can get confusing
Yeah.
because it does. So I try to be specific where I can, but then it's like such a, it sucks, right? Because I'm like, how much of the like hype train do I need to get on in order to just like be seen?
Hmm.
And then like how much do I want to like be a nerd and be very specific and be like, no, actually what I do
Yeah.
is, so
Yeah.
it's like a constant struggle.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's good. It's a good breakdown. I think it's clear kind of where you stand. Like you want to just focus on getting the most benefits out of it while being practical and real to the use cases that it's applicable for. So I think that makes sense. Um,
Mhm.
Maybe something to talk about on a future episode, maybe diving in a little bit more, especially as we get to the applied data science, which talks about machine learning and ARIMA and all these other fancy things that you were mentioning as well too. So that's coming up in the future. So we can get that a little bit later. But I guess in the meantime, as we're getting kind of close here to the end of this episode, we can talk a little bit about what's next. So, coming up next, we're going to be having a CTF type of little event kicking off really soon. Some announcements gonna go out live. Um, that's going to be part of a giveaway, part of a little competition to earn some entries to gain access to this Python course. So, do you want to maybe hint a little bit about what that's going to be looking like?
Ooh, hype my CTF here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you're going to be, you're going to be doing some installs. You're going to be looking at Python, and you're going to be looking at some packages for Python. You're going to be managing these things, and you're going to wrap it all up in GitHub. So that's all. I'll start with that.
Nice. Good little tease. I think that's good. I mean, especially if no one's actually touched this stuff before, sounds like a good
Mhm.
learning opportunity as well at the same time, which makes for a good CTF in general. So awesome. Thank you, Summer. I think we've touched on a lot. There's been a lot to unpack in this episode. Any closing thoughts, anything that you wanted to add? Any final parting advice for these would-be data scientists listening?
My advice for anyone is your skills are equally as important as your network. So keep meeting people, keep building that network because it's going to help you get your foot in the door, and then your skills will take over after that.
It's good. Very good. Thank you very much. And to all of our listeners, thank you for listening to this episode over here. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation between Summer and myself. And in the meantime, check out our fundamentals courses. They're a great prereq to get yourself started and go poke around Bash in the command line, like Summer had mentioned. So thank you again, everyone, for attending this episode.
Thanks so much, Anthony.
Thank you.